Back before phones and social media took over the planet, we actually had to go outside as kids. Maybe it's just where I live, but I don't see kids riding their bikes around or playing ding-dong ditch or doing any of those late-night troublesome kid activities anymore. But when I was a kid, and I'm talking anywhere from 9 to 17 years old, I was always outside with friends. At my childhood home, there was a park down the block from me that some of my friends and I would use as a hangout spot, especially at night since our parents would get mad at us for being loud. The park was perfect because it had a small patch of woods on 3 sides, and then it faced the street on the 4th side, and across from the park was another small patch of woods. So basically, we didn't have any neighboring houses watching us or calling the cops on us for making too much noise when we were in the park. This happened when I was like 13, that age where we were riding bikes to get literally everywhere every day. I think that day in question was a Saturday, and we had ridden to a nearby pizza place a little earlier, then went back to my friend Tony's house, which was also not far from my house. The 6 of us were hanging out in his backyard until his mom came outside and yelled at him to either be quiet, send his friends home, or go hang out somewhere else. By this point, 3 of our other friends decided to go home. Me, Tony, and our friend Rob decided to go ride to the park instead of calling it a night. It was only about a 5-minute bike ride, and there was something so refreshing about riding bikes at night. It felt easier and more relaxing. So the 3 of us got to the park, and to describe the park besides its surroundings, the actual park had a small baseball field, a small bleacher stand, a couple typical park benches, and a pretty decently sized playground with a swing set. We would always chill on the actual playground because it was a cool, elevated hidden surface to just hang out on. At some point when we were chilling on the playground, Tony went, "Shh, did you hear that?" And we all stopped talking for a few moments to listen. When nothing happened, Tony explained that he thought he heard a footstep or some kind of thump on the playground that wasn't us. So naturally, we all kind of took a quick glance around the playground and ultimately didn't see anyone. But probably a few minutes later, there was a sound that we all heard this time, and it did sound like some kind of thud emanating from somewhere on the physical playground itself. Now we were slightly unsettled, because we were almost certain someone else was there making that noise. So we took another peep, this time actually getting up and walking around, and even calling out asking who was there. Of course, there was no response. So eventually, we settled back down up on the playground. We both for another few minutes until we heard yet another sound. This time it was a much more unsettling sound. It was the sound of a voice, a child's voice, and it came from inside the slide. One of those twirling metal slides you see at most typical playgrounds. I'm not gonna lie, when we all heard it, we genuinely freaked out. Even though yes, we did hear some weird sounds on the playground, we didn't hear anyone climbing into the slide, and the thumping sounds definitely didn't come from the slide. So naturally, I walked over to the slide and listened. Then I said, "Is someone in there?" And a voice said back, "Hello." It was a child's voice. I want to say a boy. They sounded like a toddler. I was 90% sure they said hello. My friends heard it too. We all gave each other these terrified looks. We had not heard anyone in the slide for the entire half hour we'd been there. I said down the slide, "Do you need help?" But there was no response now. In fact, we didn't hear the voice again. I had to assume there was a little kid stuck in there, so I climbed in and slid down. But as I slid down, expecting a child to appear around the corner the entire time, instead, I made it to the bottom only to find it was empty. I then did a scan around the ground level of the playgrounds and the surrounding area, and there was not a soul in sight. My friends were just as shocked as I was. There was literally not a soul besides us around, and I'm telling you, it was not possible for someone to have run away that quickly, especially not a young child. We checked every possible place to hide, and there was no one. We were already beyond freaked out, but when we heard the same voice once again come from the slide, this time saying, "Catch me," we all bolted for our bikes. We pedaled faster than we ever had back to my house down the block. We regrouped and caught our breath in my backyard. We were trying to be quiet though, since my dad was likely asleep already, and he would get mad if we were loud outside. So we sat amongst ourselves talking about what just happened, and any possible explanations. But things only got stranger when there was a knocking on the backyard gate. Yes, like someone was knocking as if asking permission to come in. I said, "Who is that?" thinking maybe it was a family member, but it was an unfamiliar woman's voice. She said hello, and then said, "Were you guys just at the park before?" We once again looked at each other in nervousness. There's a tiny crack in the gate where it met the fence that you could look through and see to the other side, so I peeked through it, and what I saw was a woman, middle-aged, standing on the other side with this big, wide, creepy grin on her face, and she was already looking right at me through the crack, as if she knew to do so. I stepped away from the gate because it was such a disturbing sight. I backed away and said, "No, sorry." The woman replied back, "Are you sure?" And Tony replied for me, saying, "No, we weren't." The woman said, "Okay, thanks anyway." I stepped back toward the gate to see if she left, but she was still standing there, smiling and looking at me through the crack. We were so freaked out that we went inside my house through the back door. We quietly hung out downstairs for a while, completely shook. That woman was terrifying. Everything about her. My friends were scared to get their bikes and leave, so they slept over and left in the morning. We didn't go back to that park for a long time after that. If we really wanted to explain it all away, we could go with the explanation that there was a kid who ran away from his mother and was playing at the park, and the mother was looking for her child. But it doesn't make sense because we rode home so quickly that no one on foot would have been able to see where we went. Also, we know for a fact that we didn't see any kid running around the playground. So what the actual hell did we hear inside of that slide? Who was that? Who was the woman? At this point, it's a distant memory that will simply never be solved. I never thought a normal walk in the park could turn into one of the scariest nights of my life, but it did. I live in a small suburban town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else, and most people think it's safe to be outside at any time. It was a Friday night in the summer of 2018. I had just finished a late shift at work, and I wanted to clear my head before going home. The local park was only a few blocks away from the apartment, and I used it a lot to jog or just walk when I needed to think. That night, it was quiet, almost too quiet. The sun had set maybe an hour before, and the streetlights inside the park were on, but the main walking path still felt shadowed under the trees. I remember thinking how peaceful it was as I entered, the smell of freshly cut grass lingering in the air. I wasn't expecting anyone to be there. Most of the time on a weekday night, I'd be alone or maybe see a few people walking dogs or a couple of teenagers sitting on the benches. I had my headphones in, listening to music at a low volume, and I started walking along the main path. At first, everything was normal. I noticed a couple of dogs running in the distance, and some people walking slowly, laughing quietly. It felt calm, almost therapeutic, but then I started noticing little things that made me feel uneasy, though at the time I tried to brush them off. The first thing I noticed was a man sitting on a bench not far from the path. He was wearing a hoodie, the hood pulled up over his head even though it wasn't cold. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just sitting and staring straight ahead. I didn't think much of it at first. People sit on benches all the time, but as I passed, I realized he was looking at me. He didn't move when I walked by, didn't even shift his eyes from me. It made me uncomfortable, so I picked up my pace a little, telling myself he was probably harmless. I kept walking, trying to shake off the feeling, but then I heard footsteps behind me. I paused, and the footsteps stopped. I waited for a few seconds, then continued walking. They started again, matching my pace exactly. My heart started to beat faster, but I told myself it was probably just someone else taking their own walk. Still, the footsteps were too deliberate, too in sync with mine. I decided to take a different path, one that led through a smaller section of the park with fewer lights. The main path was still ahead, but I wanted to cut through a side trail that looped back toward the street. I figured I could get home faster that way and maybe avoid whoever was behind me. As I turned onto the trail, I noticed the man from the bench had stood up and was walking in the same direction. I thought maybe it was a coincidence, but something about the way he moved made me stop and stare. He wasn't jogging or taking a normal stroll. It was slow, almost like he was matching my pace without looking directly at me. I took out my phone and checked the time, then pretended to make a call, holding it up to my ear. The man didn't react. He didn't seem to care that I was looking at him. I forced myself to keep walking, trying not to panic. I thought maybe if I went faster, he'd eventually leave me alone. I broke into a light jog, and he did the same, keeping exactly the same distance behind me. My mind raced. Why was he following me? Was he dangerous? Should I run back the way I came? I made a decision to leave the park completely. There was a street exit just ahead that led back toward a well-lit neighborhood. I broke into a faster run, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode out of my chest. The footsteps behind me sped up, matching mine perfectly. I didn't look back again. I just ran. When I reached the street, I slowed down and finally risked glancing behind me. The man had stopped at the edge of the park, standing at the shadows just inside the trees. I could see the hood over his head, the dark shape against the dimly lit path. He wasn't moving, just watching me. I don't know how long I stood there before I turned and ran home. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly unlock my apartment door. I thought that would be the end of it. I told myself it was probably just a creepy guy who liked to follow people, maybe harmless. I kept imagining rational explanations. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he just liked watching people walk. I tried to go back to my normal life, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night. A few nights later, I was back at the same park, this time during the day, trying to convince myself it was safe. I walked along the same path I had walked that night, scanning the area for anything unusual. Everything looked normal, and I started to relax a little, but then I noticed the same bench where I had first seen him. It was empty now, but someone had scratched something into the wood. I couldn't make out exactly what it said. It looked like letters carved hastily, some of them smeared as if whoever did it didn't want it to be legible. My stomach turned. I snapped a picture and walked away quickly. After that, I tried to avoid the park at night completely. But the worst part wasn't that I felt unsafe. It was the feeling that someone knew I had been there, that someone was waiting even when I wasn't looking. I started noticing small things in the neighborhood too. Shadows moving in the corner of my eye, a figure across the street that would vanish when I looked directly, a car parked down the block that I didn't recognize, lights turning on in houses when I walked past. I kept telling myself it was paranoia, that I was imagining things, but the memory of that night never left me. One evening, maybe 2 weeks later, I decided to go jogging again in the early evening, thinking it was safer than nighttime. I stayed on the main street, not going into the park at all. As I passed the edge of the park, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A figure was standing just inside the tree line, barely visible. It was the same height and build as the man from before, and the hood was up again. I froze in place. He didn't move, but I had this overwhelming feeling that he had been there for hours, just watching. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to move slowly, keeping my eyes on him. When I reached my car, I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove away, constantly glancing back in the rearview mirror. I never saw him again after that night. At least, not in the park. But sometimes when I walk through the neighborhood, or even near my apartment, I get that same feeling, that someone is watching me, just beyond my line of sight. I've checked the park security cameras in the past, and nothing unusual shows up. No one was captured entering the park at night, and the areas I walked are supposed to be covered by cameras. I don't know if he was someone who knew how to avoid them, or if it was someone who had been living there without anyone noticing. The strangest part is that I never heard anything directly from him. No voice, no movement besides the footsteps, just that presence. I've told friends and family, but most of them dismiss it as paranoia. I know what I experienced, and I can't explain it. I've learned to avoid that park completely at night, and even in the day I stay on the main streets, but the memory sticks with me. Sometimes late at night, I find myself staring at the dark tree line where he stood, wondering if he's still there, waiting for someone else. I never go back, but a small, irrational part of me feels like he could still be there, even now, hiding just out of sight, watching anyone who dares to walk alone. I don't know why he picked me, or if it was random. I don't know if he was dangerous or just interested. All I know is that feeling of being followed, being watched without anyone seeing. It's something I'll never forget. Even writing this now, I feel a chill remembering the quiet way he moved, how he stayed just out of reach but always present. I still take my walks, but I make sure I'm never alone in the park after dark. And sometimes when I'm home, I swear I hear the sound of footsteps outside, far enough away to be unnoticed, but close enough to remind me that I'm being watched. I tell myself it's probably nothing. I hope it is, but I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, he's still waiting, watching and stalking me like he was that night. I never reported him to the police. There was no evidence or proof that anyone was there except me. I thought about it, but I couldn't even describe him clearly. Just a hoodie, a vague shape, and the feeling that he knew everything I was doing. The uncertainty is what haunts me the most. I have no idea who he was, why he was there, or if he's still around. Even walking past that park during the day now makes me tense. Even now, years later, if I'm driving past, I sometimes feel like I see a figure standing at the edge of the trees. I can't tell if it's real or just my imagination. I don't stop to find out. I just keep driving, hoping I never have to walk that path alone again. This event happened less than 24 hours ago. The details are still incredibly vivid in my head. I'm not even sure how to classify the story because it was so bizarre. It was the only time in my life that I've ever felt like I was actually in serious danger. Myself and a group of 5 friends were hanging out at a popular public park in my area called the Overlook because it had a great view of downtown and nearby universities. It was very late in the evening, around 11 o'clock. It was supposed to be just a chill rendezvous. We had no plans of doing anything other than hanging out on the park benches and talking. However, one of my friends said that he had Roman candles in his trunk and suggested that we light them off. The Overlook is probably the worst place in the entire park to light fireworks, so I suggested we go to a more secluded part of the park called the Loop. The Loop is just a few minutes away from the Overlook, and most of it is surrounded by trees, so only people within that part of the park would be able to see what we were doing. All 6 of us piled into 2 separate cars and made our way over to the Loop. Although there was plenty of street parking within the Loop, we decided to park outside on a nearby street just in case anything went wrong. We started walking toward the actual Loop part, which is basically a huge cul-de-sac surrounded by woods. The driveway to the Loop is very long and winding, cutting through a thick tree line. You can't see anything within the Loop from outside because of the trees. We noticed a few cars parked in different spots, but we thought nothing of it as people walk in this park frequently. Still, it was strange for such a late hour. As we walked deeper into the Loop, we noticed several cars parked around the cul-de-sac with their lights off. Suddenly, a truck behind us started moving, with its headlights off. It was facing the opposite direction toward the entrance of the Loop, but it quickly made a U-turn and headed in our direction. We all found this strange and hid behind some trees. The truck passed us slowly, then continued around the Loop, drove back toward the entrance, stopped suddenly, and made another U-turn. All of our stomachs sank. The truck was small, probably only fitting 3 people, yet there were 6 of us, all over 6 feet tall. Still, we were frightened and creeped out. For some reason, my friend thought that was the perfect time to light a Roman candle, and sparks flew in our direction. The truck immediately turned its headlights on and started slowly driving toward us. We ran further into the tree line, which was on a downward slope, and we hid behind more trees. However, the truck went over the curb and drove through the grass toward us. Whoever was driving must have seen us running, because they turned on their high beams and laid on the horn. We sprinted as fast as we could into the woods. These weren't paths people normally walked through. There were bushes and tall grass, making it difficult to move. About 20 feet into the woods, we began hearing voices from the truck and saw more pairs of headlights turn on from the Loop. During our sprint, we had become separated. I was with 2 friends and we didn't know where the other 3 were, but that wasn't our main concern. 2 men stepped out of the truck and sprinted down into the woods with flashlights. My friends and I lay flat on the ground, trying to stay hidden. I managed to squeeze under a large bush, but my other 2 friends were still partially exposed. We were in a sunken part of the woods, with part of the Loop directly above us. It was quiet for a few minutes until we heard footsteps and saw flashlights from above. We didn't know if they could see us, but we were basically trapped. One group was searching from the front and another was searching from above. We didn't understand why they were so upset about the fireworks. None of them had come near any of their vehicles, and fireworks are legal in our state. All we could do was hide and hope they didn't find us. After about 15 minutes, we saw the truck pull out of the grass and back onto the street, then drive away. The other headlights disappeared, but we never saw the men who had entered the woods come out. To make matters worse, one of my friends realized he had lost his phone somewhere in the woods while running. Finding it was surprisingly easy, but sneaking out of the woods and back onto the road leading to the loop was difficult. It was pitch black, and we couldn't use our flashlights or phones because we didn't want to alert the men of our location. We regrouped with one friend who had been hiding close by. He said one of the men had run right past him but didn't see him. However, he noticed the man was carrying what looked like a knife or some kind of melee weapon. After hearing this, we sprinted down the road toward the entrance. That's when we noticed the same truck from earlier, about 50 feet from the entrance. Fortunately, a dense patch of woods nearby allowed us to sneak into it and move toward the exit. Somehow, whoever was in the truck realized we started moving, because they immediately turned on their high beams and pulled the truck to the edge of the woods. At that point, we ran as fast as we could. The truck followed us along the road, but we quickly cut deeper into the woods. Eventually, we reached a main road that led out of the loop. The truck didn't follow beyond the entrance. We took 2 different back roads to get back to our cars to make sure we weren't being followed. We didn't hear from our other friends until a few hours later. They had managed to escape much quicker by running without hiding. I'm never going back to the loop. I don't know what those people wanted or why they made such an effort to hunt us in the woods, but I'm sure it wasn't good. It felt like an eternity at the time, and I've never been more scared in my life. I truly didn't know what was going to happen.